Stand, recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Grisilius,
Here.
Cromwell, Feltzing,
Here.
Shadle,
Here.
Tyler, Chairman Manchester.
Here. John, you have the minutes motion?
Yes. I move that the reading of the minutes of the November 7th, 2011 be waived, and that the minutes of said meeting as prepared by the Secretary be approved as written.
Second.
Second by Grisilius. Discussion? Being none, call roll, please.
Shadle,
Aye.
Grisilius,
Aye.
Feltzing,
Aye.
Chairman Manchester.
Aye. Kathy, you have the application on CERC.
I move that a resolution entitled "A Resolution Constituting the Final Report of the Paducah Planning Commission on the Proposed Development Plan for Multiple Principal Structures located at 501 to 509 Lone Oak Road" be tabled until December 5th.
Second.
Second by Shadle. This is Hannon Plaza. Okay, and the motion is to continue it to our December 5 public meeting. Call roll, please, Steve.
Yes, sir. Grisilius,
Aye.
Feltzing,
Aye.
Shadle,
Aye.
Chairman Manchester.
Aye. Paul, you have the City of Paducah application for text amendment, and I think Steve has a presentation.
You want me to go ahead and read
Yes,
this?
please.
Okay. I move that a resolution entitled "A Resolution Constituting the Final Report of the Paducah Planning Commission on the Proposed Text Amendment to the Paducah Zoning Ordinance by creating Section 126-72 Homeless Shelters" be adopted.
Second.
Second by Grisilius. Discussion, by way of discussion, you have a,
Yes, I have a short presentation if I could.
yes, please. Are we going to have to,
Do I need to move? Or?
do we need to move?
Maybe a little bit. Thank you very much. I would like to go over about 8 or 10 slides to kind of talk a little bit about who the providers are right now in the community and what this text amendment does that's for the benefit of the public also. Some of the providers, and certainly there's many more than this, but the ones that stand out on this sheet are the Paducah Cooperative Ministry, which I will talk more about in a few minutes, River City Mission, the Family Service Society, Salvation Army, Martha's Vineyard, Community Kitchen, Centerpoint Recovery, and as I said, there's many others. Each one of these organizations, they do different types of things, whether it's a hotel voucher or provide food. Some of them are more into the full types of service to provide housing and other services to the citizens. This graph right here just kind of shows, this was actually a 2008-2009 graph, but what it shows is that your individuals, this is across the U.S., are actually going down slightly. But what we're seeing is that there is an increase for homeless persons and families. Just some statistics. Men accounted for 63.7% of adults who used emergency shelters or transitional housing over a 12-month period. Children under age 18 represented 1 out of 5 people who used emergency shelters or transitional housing in the past 12 months. This is more of a regional, national scale, not necessarily local. Race, blacks, and Hispanics were disproportionately more likely to use emergency shelters or transitional housing. Some household characteristics. People and families with children accounted for 1/3 of those who used emergency shelters or transitional housing over a 12-month period. And locally that could be higher, and probably is. Personal background among sheltered adults, over 1/3 had a disability and 11 to 13% were veterans. Severe mental illness was prevalent among 1/4 of the homeless individuals. Locally, over 75% have special needs, and I outlined that over 1/3 had a disability, just because one of the reasons we're doing this, I think, also is to provide an avenue for a shelter to apply in the city of Paducah for a homeless shelter. We've taken into consideration the fair housing and persons with disabilities and how communities have to provide reasonable accommodation. Some of the issues leading to homelessness, this is from a Region 1 study that was done several years ago. There's lots of reasons you see there, but some of the tops were domestic violence, substance abuse, mental illness, veterans, certainly loss of work, no income. All those contribute to why a person may be homelessness, but each individual person has a different story of why they're in that situation. Just to kind of highlight a couple of the entities here locally, Paducah Cooperative Ministry, the first one at 402 Legion Drive, and I think Heidi is here, works with Paducah Cooperative Ministry, obviously. They were founded in 1973 by and for local religious congregations. They have emergency food pantry, provided food to 4,094 families in 2010, and I've kind of looked at their updated numbers, and they're actually higher than they were last year. Commodity Food Program provided food to 331 low-income residents in 2010. Emergency Meals on Wheels, and I think that's in coordination with the Senior Citizen Center, provided funding for 1,034 meals in 2010. They have an emergency assistance program, emergency funds to 1,400 persons in 2010, and some of those, the assistance included utilities, rent, prescriptions, fans, and other needs as necessary. Paducah Cooperative Ministry provided emergency shelter to homeless women, single mothers, and their children. The units are leased from the Paducah Housing Authority. It's elemental. The shelter housed 245 individuals in 2010, and I had about a 35-person capacity in those rooms. It's interesting. Paducah Cooperative Ministry, as you see there, is for mothers and their children and women. This is not a men-type facility. They have on-site supervision. They do comprehensive case management, housing counseling, mental health counseling, parenting education, transportation, and food assistance is provided. They also have an extended care housing program using the permanent housing program, home tenant-based assistance program. The other one here locally is outside the city limits, but in McCracken County, and it's the River City Mission on Bechtold Road. It's open to men and families. They have 48 beds for men. They have 4 cottages for families, 4 apartments for families, for a total of about 86 beds. And the last time I had spoken to them, they were at about 60% occupancy, and that does change, of course. They do provide, they do help with jobs and service referrals. Kind of why we're doing some of the new zoning regulations. Devian Burnett and Jeff Golatly approached the city with a proposal to rehabilitate a structure at 1227 Tennessee Street. They are hopeful that residents of Tent City would utilize this structure upon board approvals and renovation. Our local zoning regulations at this time do not allow shelters for homeless by right. New regulations have been written to allow homeless shelters in Paducah. These regulations should protect us from any future FH reasonable accommodation claim. Planning Commission public hearing, of course, is scheduled for tonight, and then after tonight, with your recommendation, the City Commission will act upon this matter in December. The purpose is to establish regulations for the locations of homeless shelters in the R3, R4, B3, M1, and M3 zones. The R3 and R4 are the higher density residential zones in the city. The B3 is your general business zone. The M1 and M3 zones are industrial zones. All approvals shall be contingent upon receiving a conditional use permit from the Board of Adjustment. What does that mean if someone was to apply for homeless shelter? If this was to pass, they would first come back to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission would review the application, and then they would make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment would hold a public hearing after notifying all adjacent property owners. Some of the regulations, each new shelter shall comply with the following regulations. 200 square feet of building space per resident, and that's a building code requirement. May not be located within a distance of 1,000 feet from another shelter, and it shall be contained within a building. The 200 square feet, let's say a structure did have 2,000 square feet. Well, that would only have an occupancy of 10 persons then. The zoning map, I threw this in because where you see the purples and the reds more towards the river, that's generally the areas that we're talking about where a homeless shelter could be located in the future. The operator shall provide continuous on-site supervision during all hours of operation. No retail sales would be allowed. The maximum occupancy is no more than 50 residents. All shelters shall create and adopt a code of conduct. That code of conduct has to be submitted to the zoning administrator and has to be approved by the Zoning Board of Adjustment at the public hearing. Possession or use of illegal drugs is not permitted. Alcohol is not permitted. Weapons and violence are not permitted. Fires are not permitted on the premises. Loitering in the surrounding neighborhood is not permitted. Littering on the premise or surrounding neighborhood is not permitted.
Steve, the weapons are permitted?
Are not. Typo. A copy of the Code of Conduct shall be provided to the zoning administrator and approved by the Board of Adjustment. The next one you can see that I've struck. Originally, the text said homeless persons may reside at the facility for 180 days. After some consultation, it's been brought to my attention that in some cases, when providers are working with homeless persons to try to find them work and/or permanent shelter, then it could exceed 6 months. So I've stricken that right now from the proposed text amendment. Adequate external lighting shall be provided for security purposes. Lighting shall be directed away from adjacent neighbors. Laundry facilities must be provided. Development may provide the following common facilities: central cooking, recreation, counseling, child care, other support services. Outdoor activities shall be limited to 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. Staff and services shall be available to assist residents in obtaining permanent shelter and income. The operator shall have a written management plan, including provisions for staff training, neighborhood outreach, security, screening of residents, training, counseling, and treatment program for residents. The number of beds shall be limited to 6 times the maximum number of dwelling units allowed. Shelters shall be located within 2,500 feet of a public transportation route. The one that says 6 times the maximum number of dwelling units allowed, that gets to the density, the size of the land. So even though we required to have 200 square feet of building area, we're also putting that in there that you're going to have a certain amount of land area also. Shelter shall be located within 2,500 feet of a public transportation route. That's approximately a half mile. Each block is approximately 400 feet. So you're talking roughly 6 blocks that there has to be a public transportation route. The last slide, what's next? Upon approval of the text amendment by the Planning Commission and City Commission, the applicant will be required to apply for a conditional use permit. Approval of this ordinance does not grant permission for the homeless shelter on Tennessee Street. A public hearing will be required. All adjacent property owners will be notified. So this is just establishing the regulations for future requests. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that the audience or you all may have.
Everyone.
Yes, sir.
In your draft, you had B1 and M2 both to be allowed, and in the presentation, you deleted B1 and M2. Is that, did you mean to do that, or?
It's R3, R4, B1, B3, M1, M2, and M3.
Okay. This is the presentation.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
I have just one question.
Yes, sir.
You said fires, I assume that means open fires?
Open flame outdoor fires are not permitted. That's correct, sir.
I was thinking, for heat and all that.
You don't have any questions? Have you determined whether there are regulations other than what we adopt by ordinance that apply to living space for a homeless shelter?
There will be additional Kentucky Building Code requirements because it is a dwelling being used by persons beyond these regulations right here.
Well, when it's open to the public, I know that probably restroom facilities are different. But these people will actually be living there. Hours and all of that.
I was going to ask, how do you have common bathroom facilities, or are they going is it going to be required to have?
A lot of that will be dictated by the Kentucky Building Code and the land use category, or the category it falls under, as it relates to the number of bathrooms and the types of bathroom facilities. And a lot of that also relates to the number of persons that they'll actually get the occupancy for.
Okay.
Each one will be different, I would assume, depending upon what type of facility they want.
Well, for example, somebody wanted to put a request or approval, and then Board of Adjustment approval, or let's say 20, a maximum of 20 people. Their regulations would be substantially the same, but would vary because of the number of people to be using it.
That's correct.
And is this gender restricted? I mean, is this for men?
No, it's not.
Okay.
This can be for families also, the way it's written right now. Now, each facility may decide to impose those own regulations on themselves, and that is what has been the instance here in Paducah right now, with the River City Mission primarily being men and families, and then Paducah Cooperative Ministry being families and children and women.
Okay.
Not families, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The families meaning women and child.
Yes, I understand.
And I don't mean to be speaking for Paducah Cooperative Ministry if I'm wrong, or you want to add anything, Heidi? Okay.
Any other questions? Positive vote means we recommend this to the City Commission, who will hear it, I guess, at their next meeting.
Yes, it would be scheduled twice in December with the City Commission. The first would be the introduction, and the second would be the final adoption.
Then it'll come back to us for a recommendation for the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah, and before that came back to you, that entity would have to submit the management plan and the code of conduct to me for my review in compliance with these regulations. And then that packet with the application be forwarded to this board. The Planning Commission will review it for completeness, compatibility with the neighborhood, and then make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment at a public hearing.
Any other questions?
Does anybody that wants to speak?
Pardon?
Any of these people want to speak?
Anybody want to speak? Patty? Okay, thank you.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right.
I think that this is,
Would you come to the podium, please?
it seems to me that this is pretty common sense, provides consistency of care, and I think that's what we all want. So I think Steve's done a good job. I'm happy to answer any questions that are specific to how we do things at Paducah Cooperative Ministry, PCM, or anything in particular about homelessness as we understand it. We do work with folks across the state, so we have a little bit of a window on what's happening in other communities as well.
The only question I saw, Heidi, was the length of time involved.
Mm-hmm.
Has been deleted from this, that somebody may occupy this facility.
Right.
And that's,
I'm happy to speak to that.
would you please?
Yes. As little as 3 years ago, Paducah Cooperative Ministry had a length of stay maximum 90 days. And we felt that at that time, 90 days was about enough time for a person who was serious about getting back up on their feet to be able to manage that. In the last 2 years, things have changed a little bit. The economy, the availability of low-income housing have caused folks to have quite a delay in being able to obtain housing. For example, I shared with Steve, we have a woman in our shelter who came in May, early May, and we require folks to get their housing applications in the first 30 days because of the delays. She's still waiting on an apartment, a single one-bedroom apartment in a subsidized housing facility. For a single adult, the Paducah Housing Authority is really the only subsidized housing entity that's an option. I've got another young woman who came to us in June, and we got the news today that she's been approved for an apartment. So a person can be doing everything they can for themselves, but simply be caught in a little bit of a tangle waiting for the appropriate housing. So with that change in the last couple of years, I felt a little uncomfortable limiting it to 6 months. There are sometimes exceptions.
I would like to clarify one thing. I struck the 6 months within the original ordinance, but the resolution you see right now in front of you, that's the only change that I've done to that resolution. It says 365 days. And that can certainly be something we can talk about, but I went ahead and put some type of time limit on there.
Question, is there a limit of some kind? And
The resolution.
should there be one? I was asking.
I think that there should be one. I mean, there's always possibly going to be an exception, but PCM considers ourselves even still a short-term shelter. And if someone appears to need something more than that, we generally get into a discussion about a more appropriate placement and work to help them find a long-term shelter where they might be able to stay for a year or two. That's not what we are. I think that every shelter has the responsibility to really figure out what they can do and what they can't do, to be very clear about what they are offering, because you can't do everything for everybody. So if you know this is what we are, this is what our function is, our purpose, our guidelines, and then if you see that someone doesn't fit that, then you can be very clear about helping them to get to a place that is more appropriate.
In other words,
Does that make
common
sense?
ought to prevail.
Yeah, yeah. You can't provide everything for everybody, so. Are there any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Sure. Thank you, Dan.
I liked it the other way. Thank you, Danny. And there exists nothing in the ordinance now that would allow this?
No, sir. We have allowed group homes in the past, but quite often when we've allowed group homes, it's been on purely the disabled clause as far as persons with disability and the requirement to provide reasonable accommodation. And that's what we've done. But right now there is no language within the zoning for this type of facility.
You all ready?
Yeah.
Hold on.
Felting,
Aye.
Shadle,
Aye.
Griselius,
Aye.
Chairman Manchester.
Down you have the application of Keith and Chrissy Mayo for waiver at
Yes. I move that this commission receive and file the application of Keith and Chrissy Mayo for the proposed free subdivision of property located at 1700 Bridge Street and 1930 Broad Street. I further move that the requested approval be given and compliance with all other applicable provisions of the Paducah subdivision ordinance be waived.
Second.
Felson. Discussion.
This is just the abolishment of an interior property line, so the property owner can expand at some point in the future if they wish. There's been a little bit of a change than how we used to do the abolishment of interior property lines. Several years ago, we allowed development over the property line, and we considered it abolished. Now, to have those expansions, we actually require the subdivision process to be carried out.
Subdivision. Okay, call roll.
Shadle,
Aye.
Griselius,
Aye.
Feltzing,
Aye.
Chairman Manchester.
Is there any other business? There being none, we stand adjourned. Thank you.